Thank you all for coming. I am giving a little talk that you might call an extension of yesterday's keynotes, which is one specific way you might start your tool building journey, specifically with wrappers and extenders. These might be considered companion projects or companion packages for Python projects. So a little bit about me. I'm a software builder, recently turned tool builder. I was the author of GT Extras in Python, which is a library that extends and supports some functionality for Great Tables. Great Tables is a library in Posit that you can find a cheat sheet for out on the Posit table after this talk. It's one of my favorite libraries, and I'm only a little biased. Developed by Michael and Richard, who I am very grateful for and want to give some thanks to for putting me on this path. I also separately enjoy some activities like ping pong, soccer, rock climbing, and biking. And I wanted to highlight biking because I'm going to start this talk talking a little bit about cycling. And if you're not super into it, that is okay. By the end of this talk, you will own a hypothetical bike. So let's suppose you have a few roommates and you all share a bike. I want to clarify, I was mentioning this to a friend the other day, and this is not a 4-person tandem bike. This is a singular bike that is shared amongst the 4 of you. The bike has an owner, so like one of your roommates owns the bike and rides it mostly for exercise rides, long rides. He likes to go fast. But you prefer, and the owner's great. The owner maintains the bike. He sets up some rear lights, all the bells and whistles, quite literally. He does the drivetrain, the gears. He's really up to speed with the new developments in the biking world, and you're very grateful for that. You don't have to do any of that maintenance. You don't need to know anything about your bike. You can just ride it when he's not using it. So you borrow it some of the time. He rides it for exercise rides. Maybe your use case is a little different. You want to bring your laptop, your mouse to work, maybe your lunch box and a fork. And so the main user isn't maintaining the bike explicitly for this purpose, but the bike works to bring your things to work. It works to commute just as it would work to ride. It still has the wheels when you ride it. But you have kind of this other purpose of bringing your things to work. And so how do you reckon these two conflicting interests? And so maybe you solve the problem for yourself. You wear a backpack when you ride your bike. You put all your work things in your backpack. And the bike doesn't need to change whatsoever. You have kind of this other piece. And there's kind of, it's not the most convenient. Like there's some back sweat, right? You're not the most comfortable on your bike. Maybe your roommates also want to commute with this bike on different days, and they need their own backpack for this to work, right? You're not going to like give away your backpack just because you are not riding to work on that day. So for anyone else to kind of use this bike, they need their own DIY version, and hopefully I haven't given away the analogy quite yet, but maybe you're catching on. Another option you might have is to modify the bike for everyone, and I've chosen a photo of these city bikes because in my life, this is my most commonly used bike outside of my personal bike. I think they have them in Boston as well, the blue bikes, if that's what they're called. And you don't need a bag to ride with your work things. You can put everything in the basket, which is a kind of nice alternative. You can modify the bike directly. That's not necessarily going to work, though, if the owner isn't interested in putting a basket on the bike, right? Your owner might not want the bike to be heavier. It might be clunky for his exercise rides, so he might not agree to this modification. Again, maybe you're thinking about what this has to do with packages. But until we get there, we're going to fork the bike. We're getting away from ourselves with the analogy. But let's say we copy the bike. So we buy a second version of the bike that is identical in every way, except we've added a basket to our version of the bike. And from there, we can kind of copy all of the owner's upgrades. Like if the owner replaces the wheels, we can go ahead and buy those same wheels and replace the wheels. Same thing with any of the other parts. This might run into a hiccup, unfortunately, if the owner does some upgrade that's not compatible with our basket. Like maybe the owner puts on a fender that conflicts and that like hits the basket, and so we can't make the same upgrade that the owner wants to make. And so maybe this fork of the bike is not super easy because we've become another owner and maintainer of our own bike, essentially, which might not be something we want. So let's think really hard about a fourth option. My dream And the ideal option in this scenario is possibly a saddlebag. So this is something that will attach to the bike and is an optional attachment, so it's removable. Not everyone has to use it. The owner, if they're going on an exercise ride, doesn't need to use the saddlebag to go for a ride. Just as an aside, the holiday season is coming up, and I don't own a saddlebag. So if you really enjoy this talk, that is an option. If you're welcome at my family's holiday gathering. Your other roommates can use these saddlebags, so like you don't need to lend them your backpack. This is just something that is part of the bike when it wants to be. It won't interfere with the owner, and it's not something that you don't need to maintain a bike, right? You haven't made a copy of anything. You just have to maintain the saddlebag because that's what you're responsible for. So that's a lot about bicycles. I'm going to pivot back to developing packages. Maybe you've come up with how these bikes have to do with package development, but in case you haven't, let's suppose you have a few roommates who are software engineers instead of package developers. Maybe their names are Michael and Richard, and they like to make packages that help you make tables. And so just so you have a sense of what the topic is a little bit, I'm going to share a little bit about GT Extras as a use case for a companion package, so that you know what GT Extras and Great Tables are. Here are some very, very quick examples of just Great Tables code. You're taking a data set, a data frame, something like polars or pandas, and it allows you to style and format your table to make it look really pretty. And this is without any companion functionality. This is all purely in Great Tables. And so your roommates have done a really, really good job maintaining and upgrading this package. Great Tables on its own has all the time lots of discussions happening on GitHub. Issues are being raised and people are adding features, and it's coming up to speed with GT, which was the original package in R. And now, as of this summer, many more of the functions that were in GT are now present in Great Tables. So if you have ever used GT in R, I would encourage you to check this out because it is getting closer and closer to a one-to-one match. And so this is because the owners and the maintainers are really, really awesome at being active. This might be akin to the bike owner, in case that wasn't immediately clear. Let's say you want to borrow the package, which in this case doesn't look like exactly borrowing the bike because you can import the package. But just so you get a sense of what your borrowing might look like is you have a data table. This is, I think, an example from an income inequality data set. The Gini coefficient is a coefficient that represents inequality. And you might make a table out of this. This is, intentionally not the prettiest table because I want to highlight GT Extras and how it works. But you have still some nice things. You have sections for different continents. You have a title on your table. You have some flag icons, some little people. But you have a lot of text, right? There's a lot of numbers on this table, and you don't really want to make someone parse all these numbers. So your use case, when you borrow or import the library, might look like a table with a couple more graphics on there. You've got a dumbbell plot, which is a favorite of mine from GT Extras, and a bar plot. And these are things that are not possible to do just purely within Great Tables. You need to write your own function that will take these two numbers and convert it into something visual, something graphic, something pretty. Let's hope I haven't totally left where I want to be. I haven't. Nice. So you have a few solutions. You might want to solve it for yourself. This is the backpack approach. In this case, instead of your backpack, you have a script. So you're building your own script that will do the formatting. And you might look at the API and you'll notice like there's a format nanoplot function that will do some plot visualizations. But then you'll find that nanoplot doesn't support this particular kind of plot. And so then you might look at the generic format function and plug in some of your own code to let the formatting take on the vision that you want it to have. And so you'll look through it and you'll notice like you can pass any function in. And it works locally. Like you've set this up. Let's say you have your script and it's really nice. But then you send it to someone and it breaks and it's not robust to different operating systems or versions of Python or versions of Great Tables. And so it's really a local, your own backpack kind of thing. It's not something that is shareable with your peers or your colleagues that also want to make these kinds of plots. So maybe you have another solution. Instead of modifying the bike, we're going to submit a PR. You're going to take that local function and you're going to say, let's throw this into Great Tables. It's a little inconvenient, right? You have to learn about the internals of Great Tables. You have to understand what the maintainers want when you're doing this PR. And so it might be an approach you want to take, but you also might end up waiting quite a while. It might take some time for them to respond to your PR. It might end up very heavily edited and might not look like what you want. And this would apply to any library. Like I have had great experiences submitting PRs to Great Tables and know that this is not the case in this library in particular. But in general, you might find that this is an issue with trying to modify a library that you use all the time. So we're going to fork the package this time. And this is kind of better than the first two, right? It's in a lot of ways, it's good for sharing. You can send someone a link to your repository that is the forked package, and they can download it and keep it in their code base, and it'll work just as you expect. But then you're becoming like a shadow maintainer, right? You have to do quite a lot of work to keep up with any updates to the package, and if there are updates, you have to make sure those end up in your package. If there's any breaking changes that affect your extra feature, you have to notice that. And so you've almost become a maintainer, which is not really what you wanted when you set out to add a little bit of functionality. And users will have to like rely on this work that isn't yours, which is all around kind of an icky situation. So again, I'm a little biased, but I would hope that you've come to a conclusion that we need something else. And so we're going to use our saddlebag of packages. This is a companion package that does a few things. It's not required for your Great Tables use. Like you can use Great Tables without the companion package. Anyone can use this companion package. It's not just kind of local. And you don't need your own. This is something that is published or at least on some version control, and so other people can download it. And there are lots of examples out there. GTextras is the one I'm using for this talk. But you might have Redmail or Yagmail, or there's lots of mailing libraries that do some wrapping functionality on top of the Python built-in library if you're trying to send any of your data over email. Things like Request Toolbelt for the library requests does a lot of good work if you're interested in doing some scraping for your data. And so these are things that are very common in the world and are great starting points for people that are looking to do something small for their tool building journey to start out. So I'm going to take a sip of water. And we're going to talk a little bit about what goes into the package. So maybe I've convinced you that it's a good idea to write a little companion package. But how do you get started? What is going to be part of that package? Well, my philosophy is that at its core, any package is a series of functions. This may look a little more complex with Python modules and classes, but at the end of the day, a package's objective is to take some input object or type and get out something that is tangible. And so in the example of Great Tables, that input is a data frame, and the output is some pretty publication-ready table that might go on a website or a journal article. And obviously, there are methods and functions within Great Tables that help you get to this end goal. And so I think we've been talking about packages for way too long, so I'm going to pivot back to some bicycles for just a brief second, if you'll humor me. I'm going to give us a couple different types of functions that we might be interested in. And so the first is a scenario where you just want to ride in 17th gear. You have 21 gears on your bike. These are kind of akin to different speeds you might want to go at or different slopes on your incline when you're biking. And let's say we know we can change the gears on your bike to adjust into 17th gear, but what if you know that you always use 17th gear and you really want to use it? You might put a button on your bike that says, and I don't know if this is really possible in a bike, but you might put a button on it that says, go to 17th gear right away. And this is an example of a function that you would use instead of the general case of changing the gears. You have a very quick angle towards 17th gear. Maybe you have a more kind of general use case of you're going on a night mountain ride, and so you know you want a gear that is third or fourth gear, depending on how strong you are. You might want a reflective vest, some lights, and these are kind of a composite of things that are useful for your night mountain ride. Maybe you want to fold your bike. This is another kind of function that you would want to do with your bike. I wouldn't recommend trying to convert like a standard road bike into a folding bike. I don't know how you would do that. But in general, this is a restructuring. This is an overhaul of what the bike does and would require maybe a little more than just a hyperspecific parameter of a function that already exists in your bike. This is something totally external. And so I'll come back to packages. I promise that's the last time you'll hear about my biking addiction. The 17th gear is our wrapping functionality. So this is something that is a function that in the library itself maybe has a lot of parameters and a lot of use cases. And you know that the most common use case for you or for a bunch of people that you work with is one specific parameter that is being called, and so maybe you wrap this function and turn it into a much shorter function call. Another thing you might do is compose, so you have a lot of steps that you know are very useful all in tandem, and so you'll take many of these functions and give someone access to all of those together in just kind of one function that you're letting someone call. And the third, and I think most powerful, is probably this extending functionality. And these are things that are not necessarily possible in the original package, but are things that you want to give access to. And so this is new code. You're not necessarily just calling part of the API of the original package. So concretely, I'm going to tell you kind of what 3 examples of these things are. And just as an emphasis that like these are just my toy examples, there are infinite ways that one might wrap, extend, or compose. The world is your oyster. The wrapping that I'll talk about has to do with Great Tables, and this is just a data set that has to do with air quality measurements in my hometown before, I think that's before I was around, in 1973. In May, they took some data, and we have a nice table. Let's say we want to do this operation with the table. We want to highlight the wind column because, for one, we have all the data in that column present, and also it's got some very interesting data. So let's say we want to highlight it. This is something we can do with Great Tables. This is not something you need an extension or companion package for. So how would we do it in Great Tables? Well, you'll find the locations, the body at the wind column, as well as the column label for that wind column. And then you'll make the call to tab style, which is your table style, set the fill, and choose the locations to be that location that you predefined. And this is kind of a lot of code to just highlight your one column. This is something that is probably a pretty common operation. Like we like highlighting the most important column or columns in our table. And so what if you could do this in just one line? That might look like this. In a wrapping function, you'll put all of this code into one function, and notice that the body of that function is the same as that kind of script that we had just written, but now instead we've wrapped it in the sense that now we have a single call that does the highlighting. And so this is a nice way to reduce some code in our code base. Another way that you might have a companion style function is to compose. And so we're going to start with the same data set. And we're going to do maybe a bunch of things. We want our dot matrix theme, which is, I think, again, before my time, but they used to have printers that produced output that looked a little bit like this with a Courier font and lowercase titles and striped rows with this specific color. And well, how would you do that in Great Tables? Well, there is a way to do it. We've put that way in the body, which is to call row striping, table font, and give a bunch of table options. And then we can compose those all together to be some theme, and we can use a pipe syntax, which is something that Great Tables has done. But you might also just say like some theme and then pass in the Great Table object, and whatever gets returned is your new table. And this is a nice way to set many kind of parameters into or many method calls into one function. But I think the meat of what we're talking about when we talk about companion packages is really an extension. And so we want to focus on things that are not possible in Great Tables. This might be something like we saw earlier, right? The dumbbell plot, the bar plot. These are things that we couldn't do in Great Tables. I won't go into the internals of that right here because it's a little hairy, but for an example, maybe we want to do a little truncating. So instead of the single-digit values on our wind column, we've said anything under 10, we're just going to say it is less than 10. And this might be useful in like a p-value context if you're looking at p-values and you want to highlight, these are all less than 0.05. You might want to do something like this. And so what would you do? Well, you would write a little script, little function that takes your value, it takes some float, and it gives you a string that is either that value, or if it's under the threshold, it gives you the string of less than 10 or less than that threshold. And then you can pass that, in the case of GT or Great Tables, you can pass it into a format call, which is a kind of nice hook into extending this package. Obviously, you may have to take a look at the API of the package that you are curious about extending because they might not all have a nice GT format, but we can pass this truncate in and we get kind of a new novel task that wasn't possible in Great Tables. And again, we can use the pipe syntax to call it with a couple nice parameters, and it makes things quite comfortable. And so these are just the main ways that you might extend. And I think the GT Extras code base is a great place to poke around if you're curious about more examples. A lot of them use this pattern of using GT format as a way of hooking into the package. I'm going to take another sip of water and we're going to talk about what else might go into the package. That was a loud sip. OK. So let's say that you have finished all of your desired utilities, right? You've written all of the scripts into kind of a more modular Pythonic code base, and you are interested in getting this out there, publishing your package, and getting other people to use it. Ideally, you're already using some kind of version control system because a lot of the next parts will involve some of GitHub's nice functionality. So we're going to talk about what goes into bundling this into a package. And so let's say you have these 3 through 5. You already have some init that exports all of your new functionality. Maybe you have some functions, some modules with classes and methods that you're interested in exporting. I personally have used the approach with a PyProject TOML file. There are many approaches, I think, to Python package development. I'm going to highlight this one because I think it shows all of the elements that you will want. But if you want to take another approach to bundling the package, that is encouraged. That's entirely possible. But let's say you have some metadata in your PyProject TOML. You also want tests. We'll talk about why that is useful. But I hope that you have an understanding already of why that might be useful. You probably want documentation in your package. You want people to understand how to use this new package, right? You're not going to get people just because they see the code base. They will also want to know what is going on. And then you'll probably want some kind of continuous integration or development pipeline that lets you ensure that you're not getting out of sync with the initial package. And so let's dive into each of those a little more concretely. I'm going to give a couple examples of tests that you might want to write for a package like this. You, again, can have at it with however you like to test, but these are some use cases in GT Extras that we've used. I've been a big fan of snapshot tests, which essentially lets you write output or expected output to disk, so you can look at what the table might look like, and then you can assert that some dynamically created table matches that expected output that's been written to disk. And that's very easy as a developer for me to parse if something gets out of sync. I can just look at the snapshot and look at the given output and notice what's different. This might not be ideal with like a massive amount of data because you don't necessarily want all of that clogging up your repository, but it's certainly an easy or just a kind of a quick approach that lets you kind of take a good look. And then the second approach is maybe a more dynamic approach, which will allow you to check analytically what's going on. And so in this, we just have a highlight columns call. We've converted it to HTML, and then we're checking that HTML for different amounts of the light blue. In this case, I want to make sure that there are exactly 2 times the number of rows in my column which is because I have, or sorry, rows in my table because I have 2 columns that I've highlighted. And if this ever gets out of sync, then I know I've done something a little wrong. And there are, again, lots of ways you can pass different tables in. You can parameterize these functions. PyTest in and of itself is a huge library that has lots and lots of great ways to do your tests. You probably also want to do documentation. This is in addition to things like your maybe examples or get started page. This is one way to do your API reference. And CortoDoc is what's being used here. And so the syntax in my docstring is specific to being able to be parsed by CortoDoc. I mentioned that because Michael Chow, who wrote CortoDoc, also wrote great tables. And so he has some great talks on this if you are more curious about documentation in particular. I think I owe a lot of what I understand about documentation to him. This kind of documentation will have things like your title, maybe some parameters, a return value, and CortoDoc does a nice job at letting you know. I don't have to say what types there are. It will infer the types from the function signature. It also can do like inline code, so you have things like your example will get rendered on the web page, which is nice if someone wants to see what is going on in your function, how it looks. You probably want some kind of continuous integration development, which looks like a robust check against kind of modifications on the upstream library or even in your own library. And you'll have a YAML file to execute jobs. This is something that is, again, something that I have used in my particular instance. You may have a different approach that works for you. But the first parameter that you'll notice is that there's a trigger for when these tests get run. And this happens, in my case, whenever I do a push, a pull, or a release. And you'll assign some jobs. So in this case, I'm gonna write my tests. And these can give some parameters, so like what machine it runs on, different versions of Python, as well as the different steps. And we'll go into kind of what each step does. You have some actions that are grabbed from common GitHub actions that already exists. And then you will want to do some things with maybe your shell. And so that will run download all your dependencies and then execute the PyTest. And these are things that you'll be interested in doing in some variation to be able to execute your tests within your package in your environment. And then we talked a little bit about the metadata that might go into packaging. This is something that will be helpful if you're trying to submit to PyPI. You'll get easily parsable names and versions and descriptions, things like dependencies and the versions of Python that you require. In the case of GT Extras, there are many more dependencies, but my favorite is SVG-PY because we do a lot of graphics and plotting within tables. And so we've written internally kind of functions that build those mini little SVGs into your tables directly, which is kind of neat. And then some more metadata, things like how you might expect to do the tests or keywords that people should look for. And so we've talked about biking, bicycle bags, saddlebags. We've talked a little bit about why you might want to write a companion package, what motivates these things, what use cases might make you want to write it. We've talked about how you might write a companion package, so what kind of goes into the source code, what kinds of functions you might want to put into a companion package, and then lastly, how to actually build it, so how you might deploy it and ship it and get other people using it. And the nice thing about having other users is people will mention things that they want added that you haven't thought of, and so you start to build a community around it, which is a nice side benefit as well. So I want to say thank you to all of you for listening today. Thank you to Michael and Richard and the whole Posit family that's given me an opportunity to do this and talk about some of this stuff. And I've left links to great tables and GT Extras on my slides, which are on my website. And that is all from me. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So let's say I have another roommate who have a shed full of different things.
Yeah.
And some of them are bike accessories that he created. How do I find them? In other words, how do you advertise, extension package for rate tables or for something else?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this particular instance, I was fortunate enough that GT Extras is kind of within the Posit family, but even if it weren't, I think that really like publishing your work is a great way to get it out there. I've made a lot of tables and posted and talked about these tables, and I think if people appreciate and like the new additions that you've made to a library, they might get keen on using it. I think also being very active with the original community is a nice way to get involved. Like if you've written kind of this source code, this extension, and if you initially put that source code into a PR or an issue, then people in the community can notice that this might be a possibility and might exist. And so down the road, kind of the gears are already turning in other people to say, oh, look, like maybe this functionality is out there. And you can kind of, if the PR doesn't get responded to, you might link to your new package and say, well, in case you ever want to do this and you notice this issue in the future, like this is one solution. But yeah, I think there's definitely many ways to get the word out there, and talking to your peers is a great place to get started as well. Any other questions? We have a couple minutes, but I'm also in need of some water, so. Well, I will be at the Posit table, and Posit folks will be there as well. So if you do have questions in the future, you're welcome to stop by. But I want to say thank you again for coming this morning and checking out the talk.